Hi everyone, so I've got Karis here with me, and we're just gonna make this work. So I want to break down some basic camera settings for you today to try to make this less overwhelming. It sounded like some of you have cameras and they're just sitting on a shelf, or maybe...
Your camera.
I do have a camera, you're right. Or you're not using it very much, or you're using it and you don't really know what you're doing with it. I want to try to make this less complicated. So let's do it. A guide to understanding your camera settings. Cameras are smart, but you are smarter. You could be shooting on auto and you take a picture, and let's say I'm taking a picture of Karis and it's bright behind her and she's dark. Why did the camera do that? The camera doesn't know what you're... Yep, there's your passy. The camera doesn't know what you're trying to focus on necessarily. So it does its best, but you're smarter and you can say, no, I want Karis to be bright and I want the background to adjust to her because I want her to be, exposed properly. You're smarter. We're going to try to figure out how to use your camera so you can take control in those situations, okay? Enter manual mode. So manual mode is only made up of 3 settings, and if you can figure out these settings, then you've got manual mode conquered. You can do it, okay? Each setting we're going to talk about its definition, its relationship to light, and then like things to watch out for, okay? Is that simple enough? Like, you can do this. It's not that complicated. First setting that we're going to talk about today is shutter speed. So shutter speed defined is the duration of time that the shutter is open. Okay, so you hear that sound when you take a picture. That is the shutter closing. And so the shutter speed is how fast or slow that closes. Makes sense, right? Think about it. The faster the shutter closes, the less light you're going to be letting in. It's going to be a darker picture because there's less light being let in. The slower the shutter closes, the more light you're going to be letting in and the brighter the picture's going to be. Make sense? A fraction is what it looks like in relationship to a second. So 1/80th of a second, 1/125th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, 1/80th of a second, and I'm not a math person, but 1/80th of a second is going to be slower than 1/1000th of a second. Okay? Do we need to pause for you to comprehend that? Okay, we're good. 1/1000th is going to be 1/80th is going to be a little slower, okay? And then like 2 seconds is going to be whatever, okay? What to watch out for. You want sharp images, and the shutter speed is what gives you sharp images. So slowing the shutter down runs the risk of having a blurry image, okay? So here's your examples. Fast shutter speed in this first picture to the left in the top corner. A fast shutter speed is what I was doing here. It's a darker image, but it's more in focus. This one, I've made it brighter, more properly exposed, but the give and take is that it's now blurry because I'm slowing down the shutter speed and letting more light in, but it's giving me a blurry picture, okay? So that's shutter speed. Next one is ISO. ISO defined as the camera's sensitivity to light, okay? You might be wondering why there's a picture of grain here. That's because ISO affects, have you ever seen a picture that's like grainy? I realize that it's not this kind of grain, but maybe you'll remember it now, okay? So ISO affects the camera's sensitivity to light, giving you brighter images or darker images, grainier images, or less grainy, more quality. So its relationship to light is, this one's probably the most simple. The higher the ISO, the brighter the image. The lower the ISO, the darker the image. And the way that it looks is, it's just a basic number. So 100, 250, 320, 1600, etc., etc. But again, there's a give and take. And so what you need to watch out for is, can't I just pick any number I want then? If I want it to be a bright, properly exposed image, can't I just pick any number? Well, the higher you go with the ISO, the grainier the image is going to end up being. The lower you go with ISO, the better quality, the less grain, okay? So in this first picture to the left in the corner, it's a high ISO, it's a bright image, but if you can look closely, there's grain right around here in the dark spot, okay? See the grain? I'm like, oh, can you? Okay, I can see it. My face was really close to the camera. In this picture down here, it's a darker image. You have a lower ISO, but there's not as much grain, and that's the give and take. If you're outside, then you're already getting plenty of light, so you can afford to have a low ISO. But if you're inside and it's dark, can't always afford that. Last one, aperture. So aperture defined, this one's complex, but it's probably my favorite of the 3. Aperture is an opening by which the light enters the camera. The smaller the opening, the less light, the darker the picture is going to be. The larger the opening, the more light, the brighter the image is going to be. Okay, so here's a nice battery. The most beautiful picture of a battery you've ever seen, I'm sure. In this picture to the left, I have a low aperture, and it's a nice, bright, properly exposed image, and it's a blurry background. If I raise my aperture, now I have a higher aperture, I've got this darker image down here in the right corner, but you'll notice it's more focused in the background. So it's about what you're going for. But do you see how these lines of the window are way more in focus than this one up here? That's just my baby. Okay, so that's aperture. And you'll notice here, like, leaves nice and focused, blurry behind. That's called depth of field, and your aperture is what affects that. Okay, what does it look like? I think we're gonna have to take a break 1 second. Okay, one child has food, the other has a toy, we're good. This is how it looks. It's a decimal number. So the lower the decimal number, the wider the opening is gonna be. The brighter the image is gonna be. The higher the number, the decimal number, the smaller the opening is gonna be, and the darker the image is gonna be. So that might be a little confusing. Feel free to pause, take it in. So aperture affects your depth of field, like I said. So you don't really have a lot to watch out for unless you want all your picture to be in focus and not have the blurry background. So in conclusion, the higher your aperture number, the smaller the opening is going to be and the less light you're going to be letting in. The deeper your focus is going to be, meaning there's less of a blurry background and it's going to be, more in focus. The lower your aperture number, the larger the opening and the more light you're going to be letting in because it's a bigger opening. The shallower your focus will be, meaning there's going to be more of that blurry background that we love, okay? So, real quick, I'm just going to talk... She's playing the piano behind me. I want to just hit on camera dial settings real quickly. So, on a Canon, you have your auto. Program is like auto without a flash. You can think of it like that. AV mode is basically, so it's aperture priority, and that's where, this is a great place. I shoot on AV a lot. Aperture priority is where you're picking the aperture and the camera's gonna pick your shutter speed. It can get, don't shoot on aperture priority if you really wanna make sure your camera is crisp, clear, and focused and something's moving, because you might mess that up. But if you're just shooting people standing still or whatever, like aperture priority, I love shooting on that. TV is shutter priority, which is just the opposite. You prioritize the shutter speed and the camera picks the aperture. And then manual mode is where you're picking all three. You're picking aperture, you're picking shutter, and you're picking ISO. Okay, Nikon, I put the ones that go along with that on Nikon. I don't have a Nikon, but there are those. If you shoot on something else, just Google it and you can probably figure it out easily, okay? So I hope that helped. I know that was a lot of information. Ultimately, ask yourself these two questions. What is the light like in my situation, my shooting situation? And is my subject moving, okay? So if it's dark, if it's dark where you're shooting, I'm gonna need to bump up my ISO or slow down my shutter speed or make my aperture smaller. Find the sweet spot. They all three work together, and determining what situation you're in is gonna help you determine what to give and take, your ISO, your shutter speed, your aperture. Is your subject moving? If they're moving, you're gonna need to prioritize the shutter speed. But when you bump up the shutter speed, remember it makes the image darker. So you can make up for that by increasing your ISO or making your aperture smaller. So they all three work together, and it's a give and a take. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to you. The best way to get better at these things is just to take your camera and go practice and shoot in different situations and figure out, okay, what do I need to give and take here? Do I need to bump up my ISO? Do I need to slow down my shutter speed? But now it's blurry, so maybe I need to up my shutter speed and change my aperture. They work together. You can figure it out. Reach out if you have questions. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.